right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this November 6th meeting of the Somerville School Committee. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the School Committee will be conducted via hybrid participation. We will post an audio recording, audio-video recording, transcript, and other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and local cable access government channels. We will begin with a moment of silence and a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Dr. Cremona, will you call the roll?
Yes. Dr. Rackman?
Here. Here.
Here.
Ms. Diane,
Here.
Ms. Barish,
Here.
President Ewan Compton,
Here.
Dr. Phillips,
Here.
Ms. Kripchen.
Here.
We have quorum.
Great, and I will now introduce our interpreters. Spanish, will you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, team. This is your Spanish interpreter, Tracy. I will explain the instructions for the Spanish channel. Hola, buenas noches. Soy la intérprete simultáneamente de español. Para seleccionar el idioma español, por favor, seleccione el canal en español, la opción español para escuchar la interpretación simultáneamente. Buenas noches. Thank you, team.
Thank you. And Portuguese? Should I try Haitian Creole?
Hi, this is Ben Cruz. I'll be the Portuguese interpreter.
Great.
Yeah, I've been here like just no.
If you could just do the instructions for how to access the Portuguese, please.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay. Haitian Creole?
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be the Haitian Creole interpreter for the evening. Bonsoir tout le monde. Et moi, c'est interprète créole haïtien. Et capable de accès ensemble avec interprétation ça en créole haïtien. On va cliquer sur le contrôle gros blanc qui est en bas et puis on va sélectionner créole haïtien pour capable prendre des réunions ça. Merci.
Thank you. That brings us to the student advisory. Are they on Zoom? Are they not here with us? Okay. If they come on Zoom, will you please let me know? Thank you. That brings us to public comment. We have one person listed from public comment who is joining us from Zoom, Erin Finney. Erin Finney, you can unmute yourself.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
How you doing? So I'm a mom. I'm a Winter Hill mom. I've got one kid that's currently at Capuano. He's in pre-K. Thankfully, he'll be moving to Edgerly. My other kid is a first grader, and she's at the Edgerly building. I'm calling or commenting tonight about the busing. I'd really like to see it be something that remains an option for Winter Hill parents to get their kids to Edgerly for a combination of different options, reasons. One, we signed up for our close proximity school for the most part, so going the extra distance is definitely, concerning for some parents to stay with our school if the busing disappears. Reason number two is we've got, 500 kids that will be at Edgerly next year, and there's 800 across the street within one block. So we have 1,300 kids getting dropped off in a one-block radius. The buses make a lot of that disappear, the chaos that happens at drop-off. So it's not just helping the Edgerly parents, but it's helping out the East Somerville parents. So please really consider keeping the busings in effect until we can leave the Edgerly building. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the report of the superintendent. Dr. Carmona.
Good evening, everyone. I am going to start with the report that is going to be led by our equity update. So we will have our equity update report.
Do I have a slideshow or should I just go? Oh, okay. Thank you, Anna. So, hi, I'm Kaylee Galatano, Director of Equity and Excellence for the district, and I have our report, an update on what we're working on this year. Our focus really is on where we are, where we want to go, and how we will get there. Last year was a really great opportunity for me to get acclimated to this role, get to know the different people with whom I work closely. And we really formulated a lot of ideas and cultivated them. And this is the year that we really look to put those ideas into action, like the rubber kind of needs to hit the road. So that's what we're looking at doing this year. Next slide, please. So we will be looking at our structure, focus, and follow-through. So what I will walk you through in this presentation, we'll start with the structure of the department. I will then discuss what we want to measure. So what are we looking at? What does success and progress look like for us? What and how do we want to measure it? And then in order to answer that, we will examine desired results and outcomes. We will think about the analysis of the data, stakeholder engagement, implementing strategies for racial equity. And I would actually say put racial in parentheses because I would like to look at equity as far as neurodivergent, LGBTQIA. Implementing that plan, Heidi will talk to us about coaching and what that looks like in the schools. And last, we will talk about accountability and communication. Next slide, please. So for the department structure, we have the director, that's me. We have the district equity coach, that's Heidi Given. Each school has an equity specialist, and that specialist works with their school-based equity team. The teams average about 4 to 5 people, except the high school, which has 10 because it's very big. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about what we want to measure, we want to be thoughtful about what we are measuring and how it ties into the district's goals as well as the school committee's goals and what the overall goal that you all had cited of developing the whole child. So we want to look at how the students and their families feel that they fit into their school community. How do they feel seen and heard? Do they feel safe and brave? Do they like coming to school, and do their grades, attendance reflect that if they are enjoying coming to school? We also want to think about and examine how we will hold ourselves responsible and how we will measure our progress. Next slide, please. So, with progress, we need to think about, we will start with examining our desired results and outcomes. We need to analyze the data and be thoughtful about the data we're analyzing and the way in which we're analyzing it. And that's something that I'll work with Sarah, Joe, and Sam on. Is the data, for example, is that data unbiased? And how are we measuring success? How do we categorize problematic behavior? How do we make hateful actions, how do we monitor hateful actions, behaviors, and language? When we think about stakeholders, how do we increase stakeholder engagement? What steps can we take to ensure that we're hearing all or most of the members of our community? And thinking about that, we will continue to examine, review, and build upon the strategies that we are currently using and think how we can kind of build up on those. I don't know that we necessarily need to change them, but we are going to look at re-examining them. And how are we in order to create equity in our schools and district communities. Next slide, please. So with our desired results and outcomes, we want to be sure that they align with the goals of the state, the city, and the school committee. So what we are focusing on is our diverse workforce, having strong DEI policies and practices, and supporting students in equitable access to the curriculum. The asterisk indicates that that is what is listed on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's website. We also want to have people understand why they're doing this work, and I say that because in addition to, yes, it is, we are either legally or morally obligated to do it, having people understand the importance of why we're doing this and that it's for our children, right, to impress upon folks the importance of creating spaces of equitable and, equity and safety for our students, staff, and families, beyond it just being a requirement for the state or the district. We do this work for our students. The work is important because our students are important. And when people have a better understanding of the why, and they're provided the tools and supports, they'll have a stronger buy-in, and we'll likely see more effective change. Next slide, please. So this is the vision statement for equity in Somerville. And we conduct our work with this vision in mind. Next slide, please. So, analysis of the data. We are going to assess where we are in terms of equity across the school community. These are the tools that we already use, the conditions for learning survey, and we're identifying areas in which we're missing segments of people or highlight trends and patterns of inequity. We have iReady now, which will help us examine the gaps in learning. We have academic data. We do disaggregate it by race and school. I'd like to look more closely at that. So when working with the data team, how are our students doing in regards to race, language acquisition status, and poverty? Are there gaps? The gaps should not be predictable, but are they? And if they are, why are they, right? So we'll continue to analyze the data across various identity categories to understand impact. And we can do that with an equity audit and pre and post surveys. The equity audit is a very big undertaking. It's not one that this department could likely do without bias. So I say an equity audit realizing that that may or may not happen during this or the next school year, but it would be something that is helpful. But we also do have pre and post surveys that I think will be helpful, in addition to, there's always feedback when we do professional development, like, do you feel like you learned something from that? How organized was the presenter, right? So those are all important things to know, but what I would like to do is ask questions more around what was your handle on this topic, right? Like entering, I'm paraphrasing, I wouldn't probably put it like that, but what is your understanding, or how capable did you feel? And then at the end of the four session series, ask those same questions so that we can get a gauge. What we're teaching folks and what we're trying to impart on them, is it landing? Is it helpful? Are people growing? So that's something that can be helpful in the analysis of data. Next slide, please. So for stakeholder engagement, so there the list of some identified stakeholders, right? So when we think about the first bullet, which is caregivers, some of the things that we are thinking about and beyond thinking about wanting to take into action, where do we hold parent night, right? Does it have to be at the school? Could it be at a community venue? Could it be at different hours of the day, right? So these are all things that I'm tossing out that we will parse out and settle on, hopefully, and have some. Well, also, the thing about this work that's so wonderful is that it is collaborative, right? So these questions that I'm asking are best answered by the community and by people who work closely with the community, like the SFLC, right? So they're very helpful to me as I try and navigate how we can be more inclusive and hear not all, I recognize we won't hear all voices, but how can we hear more or most voices? The other thing that will be helpful as we examine the data is developing an equity map. Equity mapping can help us to better see who's included, who's being left out, how we can create change, and with whom we need to partner and how we need to partner with them. So as we're collecting data throughout the year, at the end of the year, hopefully we'll be able to have a nice equity map that kind of allows us to see what we're missing and where we may be a little too heavy. Next slide, please. and our strategies for equity, these are some of the things that we have identified as what we are doing currently across the district and that we will continue to grow on and build on. It is important that as we do this work, as many people as we can catch in the net are getting the same information delivered to them in the same way, so that no matter what school you're going around to, what school you work in, what school your child goes to, everybody has the same idea and foundation upon which they can build. Recognizing that there will be some things that are more specific to certain schools, but the foundation needs to be given in a universal way so people aren't like, oh, I didn't know about that program, or I didn't know that. So what we're working with is we have our language alignment, the what we stand for and what we don't stand for document, inclusive vocabulary list, which continues to grow and change. We have our central guiding texts. Heidi and some equity specialists and I spoke about what texts, there are so many wonderful texts, but as we're going and doing this work, what are 3 that we really want to use as our North Star? We have culturally responsive teaching in the brain, coaching for equity, and inclusive conversations. All of these texts are being used in one form or another district-wide. So for example, the coaching for equity, it has wonderful chapters, information, and rubrics that Heidi uses in her work as she goes from school to school. Onboarding and recruitment, we have the diversity fair, and we also have what we're developing in the equity department with the equity specialist is a responsive handbook. That is actually the idea of Jillian Ceballos, who is the equity specialist at the East Somerville Community School, so thank you, Jillian. She and her team started a handbook, kind of like an if this happens then, right? Because a lot of teachers are like, oh my gosh, you know, these kids are saying, they've said this, they did this, so it's kind of like, and we'll have it broken down by age group. Because how you would respond to an issue with a child who's in 2nd grade is very different than how you're going to respond to an issue with a child that is in 8th grade. So we continue to work on, I put that under the strategies that we're currently using, even though technically we're still developing it. Next slide, please. Our implementation plan. So as I mentioned before, it's the uniformity in the message and the delivery of the message. So similar to the January 3rd PD that we had, where all educators receive the same message, expectation, and tools, we are partnering, the Department of Equity is partnering within the district to effectively and broadly implement the tools, information, and support that we need to build a stronger community that is based in equity, inclusion, and belonging. So an example of that is we are working with Chris Glynn, the other CG, in developing and implementing the Year 2 Educator A-Bar series. So all of the educators who are in their 2nd year are required to take this 4-part series. The 2nd part will be Monday night. We already had the 1st part. And we are basing all of the work in the book Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. And it's a wonderful book. A lot of people have already read it. A lot of educators are like, oh, I have that book, I read that book, which is great because it helps to guide the conversations within the PDs. The professional developments are being guided by the equity specialist, which is wonderful. So basically, there is a template that I've created, and then what will happen at our meeting on Wednesday, we'll all go over it together so that on Monday, they feel confident and good to go. And the lift is not overly heavy, and that it's like, oh yeah, on top of all your teaching and all your equity stuff, make a PD, right? It's like, nope, here's the PD, and their thought helps to shape it. But it's really wonderful because it gives them a chance to connect with the staff in their school. The school knows who they are. It community builds, and it also gives us that way of uniformly giving this message across the whole district to the 2nd year educators. And we'll continue to partner with other departments to have professional development for staff who are not able to attend after-school PD sessions like community schools and SFLC. So sometimes they are interested in the professional developments that we're offering after school, but they're not able to attend because that's when they're working with kids. So thinking around ways that we can have professional developments that they can attend. Next slide, please. And that brings us to coaching. Heidi is going to share with you what she is doing in terms of coaching around the district, and then I will be back to tell you more stuff.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Microphones make me nervous, so I'm just going to say that. So now I can calm down. So I'm Heidi Given. I'm the district equity coach. If you could put the next slide up, that would be great. My role began last year. This was a new position last year. So last year was a year of figuring out what does this role mean and how do I use my time wisely. So basically, my job has these three main components, along with a lot of just incidental conversations, meetings, and other pieces. So I spend about probably 60 to 70% of my time coaching, and another 20 to 30% doing what we're calling consultations. And then I do a significant amount of professional development, design, and delivery, either on my own or in collaboration with other people. All that work is really centered around expanding practices that advance equitable access to the curriculum for students, as well as trying to create more opportunities for student voice, sense of belonging, student engagement, and achievement. And in that, also working to address institutional patterns or societal patterns that are associated with student racial identities and other marginalized identities. So next slide, I'm going to break it down for you a little bit. So coaching is a direct, practice-embedded, super personalized form of professional support and development. The way that I have been doing it is designed around the equity policies, so really working to support educators in providing opportunities, environments, high expectations, and resources so that every student's needs can be met in order to achieve educational success, in order for students to feel valued and heard, and so that they can contribute to their learning communities. The general structure is that I provide coaching to direct service providers, mostly classroom teachers, but maybe specialists, maybe counselors, but people who are directly face-to-face serving students, sometimes maybe a special educator or a reading specialist, sometimes usually as individuals, but a few times as teams. Which is really interesting and impactful when it's going well. Most coaching cycles last between 6 to 10 weeks, although there's some flexibility in that. If something's going really well and an educator wants to keep moving and I have time in my schedule, maybe we do a second cycle, or maybe we go to an every other week or a check-in basis. So there is an organic, fluid nature to all of this. The coaching is initially very driven by the educator's articulated interests and outcomes. Also, I do a significant amount of observation and data collecting, and so in there, that also can kind of drive the direction of our goals and what we're wanting to work on, and it generally evolves over time. The way I work predominantly is if I'm coaching you this week, then there's a day of the week. Every Tuesday, I come to your classroom, and while I'm there, maybe I'm observing, maybe I'm co-teaching with you, maybe I'm modeling something. And then at your planning period for that day, we sit down, we meet, we debrief, we talk, we plan some new goals, do it again the next week. We do use a variety of reflection tools. One is the equity coaching rubric that came out of that Coaching for Equity book. It's like an evolved version of Elena Aguilar's work. And maybe we use the whole tool or pieces from the tool. It's very individualized. So that's kind of the coaching lay of the land. Can we go to the next slide, Anna? So consulting, unlike coaching, is really available to just about anybody in the district who wants to do some thinking together or wants to do some planning together around a particular aspect of their work that has an equity question or component to it. It can be a one-time conversation that happens pretty frequently, and then sometimes it can be a series of conversations. Last year there was one person from food services that I met with all year long. Sometimes it's usually more like a 2 or 3 session piece, but it really depends on the work. Consultations can really be about anything, grounded in doing our best to ensure that all students, families, and colleagues are getting what they need to feel safe and seen, embraced, and able to do and share their best learning. And it often has looked like looking at data, being a thought partner around how to respond to a particular incident or a trend in a school or in a department, responding to students' inquiries or student input. Increasing family voice has been a common conversation with some administrators. A lot about resources, books, curriculum, how to augment, add to. So that's just some of the components of that. And then finally, the professional development and design piece. There we go, there it is. I've been kind of working in a variety of ways. I present a handful of district catalog professional developments each year. There's a little tiny in the tiny print at the bottom, a list of what happened last year and what's happening so far this year. I also work with school-based teams. Some schools, it's their equity team. Some schools, it's their instructional leadership team. Last year, I also worked with a team of counseling team from a school to kind of co-create and co-plan their school-based professional developments. And then this year, for the first time, I also worked with one of our community partner preschool programs to design PD. And then all of those PDs are very individualized and designed to the specific needs of that school or that program and their staff. And I think that's everything I have. Great. Unless there are, do we do questions at the end, or if there's questions?
There's still more to the presentation, but we're going back to Callie. Is that the idea? We'll do questions at the end.
So now we are in accountability, which is for me anyway, I feel like it's the trickiest part of this work, is how are we holding ourselves accountable, and then is the way that we're holding ourselves accountable, like really holding ourselves accountable, and examining that. So the first piece of accountability is looking at our tangible, is communication. I apologize. So the first thing is that we hold ourselves accountable to get communication out with the consistency and regularity that we promise that we will. So we do that through newsletters, equity library, coaching sessions with Heidi, the consulting sessions that Heidi mentioned as well that she does, with affinity groups, informative emails, updates, and professional development for educators and administrators, because I think it's important that what we're doing for the educators, we're doing for the administrators as well, so that everyone can truly be on the same page. Next slide, please. We also have long-term partnerships that we would like to foster and continue and build upon, and that's just a list of some of the people with whom we're working. We've developed, one thing that's really nice is we have developed a very strong relationship with Izzy Starr, who works here for the city, and with Stephen Flythe. So it's really helpful as we craft documents. For example, in the most recent newsletter, there is a section on Transgender Awareness Week, and Izzy and I sat down together and crafted that document, which was really helpful. It felt collaborative, and it really felt like we're building a bridge between the city and the schools. So we were pretty pleased with ourselves. Next slide, please. And these are measuring, so measuring the effects and progress. So the things that we will need our data for, and we will be looking at this throughout the year, and of course at the end of the year, and then thinking how we can restructure over the summer, is hiring diverse staff, the retention of diverse staff, the promotion of diverse staff, which I don't know if we've looked at that before, maybe we have, but not that I'm aware of, student reporting, staff reporting, family and caregiver reporting. We'll look at attendance, of course, academic and test scores, special education population. We want to take a really close look at that, and our multilingual learners. And that, I believe, is the end. I think before I do close, and then you all can ask me questions, one thing that I was thinking about this past weekend was, so as we're doing this work, and it's important that we're collaborative with one another, right, and listen to one another and build off of each other's ideas, give each other grace. I was thinking about the word empathy, and I think we use that word a lot, right? We're like, you need to be empathic or empathetic, however you pronounce it. And I think that a lot of times we attach empathy to feeling for someone who's downtrodden or something bad has happened to them. And the true definition of the word empathy is to be able to feel a feeling, right, or feel for someone who's experiencing something that you are not currently experiencing or have not experienced. So sympathy is when it's something that bad has happened and I have also experienced that, so I can commiserate with you. Empathy is just sharing in a feeling, and those feelings can be good feelings, right? I think we always use empathy in a way that it's kind of to someone who is downtrodden, but I think that we also need to really focus on empathy and sharing in the feeling, celebrating each other's joys and successes, and really acknowledging that this district, so as you know, I think I'm part of AMSA, which is the Association for Massachusetts School Equity Leaders, and we talk very candidly with one another about what is happening in districts across the state, and it makes me happy and proud that I work in this district. We have work that we have to do and we will continue to do, but I look at where we're at and where we want to go and how supportive this community is of that, and I feel very grateful for that. So I just wanted to close with those comments about empathy and how really we're all doing a really good job. So, but I'm sure there's areas that we can improve, so questions.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I believe I have Dr. Ackman with the first question.
Thank you. Through the chair, first off, thank you for you including neurodivergence as a growth. I'm sure Dr. Boston Davis can tell you for her years in the role. I spent a long time when she presented overviews, asking about that piece of inclusivity as well. So I'm excited to see that as a growth area. One of the things I'm curious about. I'm very curious about coaching. I went through the rubric, absolutely loved it. You've built something, or expanded it into something really impressive. How are people identified, and are they, my working theory is that the people who might need it most might be the least likely to be open to it. Is that theory correct? And like, how are people identified? Can you just dig in more on like, how do you, someone who might be slightly resistant, how do you get them into it? Have you found resistance? Like, you know, the equity coaching it takes a lot of self-reflection, and that's why that rubric is really comprehensive. So like, what does it take to get people interested? What does it take to get people there? Because I assume the people who are kind of knocking at your door and want it may not be the ones who need it the most.
Right, so first I'd like to give the dues and props to Heidi. Really developed that rubric that you're talking about, so right on, Heidi. And it is really wonderful. So that's the first part. But the other part is, yes, I think that so coaching is voluntary, right? Because there's, we don't have any other avenue but to make it voluntary right now. That's something we can perhaps investigate, but it is voluntary. Heidi and I have talked about, and other folk have talked about the concern. It's the same concern that we have around the professional developments that we offer. We love to see the people who are coming to the professional developments that are based in equity. That being said, a lot of times they are folks who are very self-reflective and very much looking to how they can facilitate change. We all need those professional developments, no matter who we are, but it's similar to the professional developments in that it is voluntary. One of the ways that we are working to be able to impart the knowledge on people and not have it be voluntary, I don't want to say force, I just want to say that it's the expectation, is by having these, like implementing, this is the first year that we've made second-year educators do anything, right? Like as far as their choice PD. So that's a way we're working on casting a wider net. But in terms of coaching specifically, no, it is voluntary. You're welcome.
Dr. Phillips? And then Mr. Jones. And then Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for this great presentation and for all the work that you have done. Like, it is clear that you and your team are thinking really deeply about what this department is going to do and how are you going to get there. My day job is in program evaluation, so I spend a lot of time doing this too. And sometimes when I'm kind of where you're at with a program, my next step is to try to draw it out and to say, you know, if we do coaching and we do consulting, then what happens next, right? Because like, while we want to affect student attendance and academic test scores, maybe the first response is, oh, my teacher's less of a racist, or, you know, like, what is in the middle? And I sort of wonder too if like mapping it out might help you see, like, I see these great goals about hiring diverse staff and retaining diverse staff and promoting diverse staff. And I see great action in what you were talking about in affinity groups, and like, are affinity groups going to get us to these goals? Are we going to need, so sometimes for me, just drawing it out helps me see, oh yeah, that's it, that's what we're doing.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. That's part of where the equity mapping came in. Heidi and I did a little bit of that with our Harvard intern that we had last year, and it was really helpful because I am a visual learner, so it was really helpful. So thank you. That's something that we will definitely continue to talk about and how we can do that in a thoughtful, effective way. Thank you.
I have Ms. Patone and then Ms. Dion.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you. Super comprehensive, super thought-provoking. One thing you spoke briefly about was an equity audit. So equity audits have been brought up to this body a few times, and there was some resistance to an equity audit. And so I'd be really curious about sort of a little bit of the pros and cons, because as you had said, it would be probably a third party that comes in, and the biggest thing is what do you do with the information? So I'm surprised that there was an excitement about it in the past. I'm curious why you think maybe it's not this year or next year. What is a good point to do something like an equity audit?
So the reason why I said not this year or next year is because I didn't want to jump the gun. They're expensive. So that's why I didn't want to be like, so we'll have them in here next year. And people are like, no, you won't. So, so that was really why I was saying not this year or next year, was really a financial thing. I do think that the pros, I'll have to talk some more with colleagues like from AmCell and do a little bit more reading on the cons of an equity audit. But the pros, from what I can see, is that it is someone else who's like coming in and looking in from the outside, right? Like that's like the basic kind of overview thing. But then it also, what is helpful about equity audits is it gives us oftentimes those people who are coming in have a different way to look at the data, because I feel like sometimes even when we think that we're looking at it differently, we're not looking at it differently. And because they are data specialists, really, that's who is performing an equity audit, who aren't biased because they don't work in here with us, right? Like Sam and Sarah Jo and their team, they do a wonderful job of breaking down the data any way you want it broken down. They also are great thought partners and pointing out to me, hey, have you thought about breaking it down this way, right? But I think for an equity audit, it's so, they really will be able to commit that time to looking at the whole district, and like that's their job, is just that one thing, right? And we would have to pay them for it, so we'd have, hopefully they do a good job.
Did you want to follow up?
Yes, through you, Chair. I think something that would be helpful to me as a school committee member is about timing and readiness. I think that if it's the right time to do it, then we really should invest the resources. If it's not the right time to do it, when might be the right time? So to understand, for lack of a better term, like you're calling it an equity map, where in this equity map do you feel like, you know what, next year is the right time? We've made this progress, that progress, and this other progress. We're not going to be able to make that incremental change or improvement unless we have this data. So that's like kind of what I bring to you, is this idea, and you collaborating with the superintendent and saying, like, you know, right, it isn't the right time, or it is the right time, and we want to consider investing in this way or not.
Yeah, thank you. That's something we can look at more closely for sure and see, is it the right time? Thank you.
Ms. Dion?
Yep, first of all, I love the book, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. That's a great one. I'm glad that that's, you know, people are reading it, because it's really good. It's very helpful. I'm wondering if maybe going back to the idea of like with the coaching, I'm wondering, like, is it ever, could it possibly be something that, like, in like a teacher's evaluation, if that's like an area of need that the supervisor notices, like if they could like say in the write-up, you know, suggesting like meeting with the equity coach, if that's something that, you know, a possible way to like, you know, just not be preaching to the choir necessarily.
Yes, that is what we would ultimately like to happen. Heidi and I have talked about that. I'm not sure what the avenues we would have to take with that. But yes, I agree with you. And I have thought this for a long time before I worked in Somerville, and when I worked in BPS, I was like, if we're doing these evaluations and this evaluative process, how, and we're hitting the like, you know, there's the standards you have to hit, but they're kind of vague or open to a lot of subjectivity. Is there a way that we can make it less subjective and make it like a requirement to hit? Yeah, so yes, but that is, I feel like I'm not the decider on that. I have the ideas of the questions and things. Heidi and I have talked about that, but I'm not sure. I think we'd have to, I'm not sure what avenues we would take, but I'm happy to talk more with people who would know better than I.
And it looks like, sure.
Also, I just wanted to let people know that there's an informal way that is somewhat happening now, so that it does happen that a supervisor may have concern and may make a suggestion to an educator. But the final decision on that really does rest on the educator. So there can be a very strong suggestion made, but because of the contract, the hand can't be fully forced. Does that make sense? But there's a lot of informal conversations. There's also a lot of, you know, maybe something being on my radar and my milling about a bit, or, you know, through the PD process, kind of getting a sense of who could use some additional support and offering that informally, moving hopefully towards something more formal. So there's motion happening, But there's just contractual limits as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have Ms. Barish and then Mr. Green.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, thank you for the presentation, for all the information that you provided. I was glad to hear you mention making PD available to SFLC and community schools employees who may not be available when you're typically offering the PD. I've been thinking about other folks in the district, like some of our coaches, for example, like athletics coaches aren't educators, so they may not have access. I don't know about like nurses or like clerks and the custodial staff, you know, because all of the people in our buildings impact our kids and have the power to really make a difference. And they do make a difference. And I think that it'd be awesome if they had access as well. And I know that they're different unions, so you know, contractually, there are a lot of, there may be some challenges, but I would love to see even more people in the district be able to have access to the amazing things that you're providing.
Thank you. That's something that we'll think about and consider, because we also talked about cafeteria staff, and yeah, so it's tricky, but I think that we can certainly do it.
Mr. Green and then Dr. Ackman. Was your fault? Okay. Dr. Ackman?
Through the chair, just to what Ms. Barish was saying, there's actually a lot of, or my understanding is that I haven't looked in a while, but there's research that backs up that it is the relation, like those ancillary relationships hold a lot of value. I think we've all seen it anecdotally, but like there is data behind it, and so I think it's worth the investment of like those union contracts, making sure that we do what we can to, you know, expand your department and get those going. Thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Barish.
Mr. Green?
Well, I was going to say that, as a reminder, SEU was a partner in establishing mandatory PD around this issue in our last contract, and I see no reason why we couldn't work in that strategic partnership towards making coaching part of this. And then eventually, I do believe, as a district, we want to be in a place where all of our employees, from the superintendent to cafeteria workers to teachers, have equity built into evaluation, which is obviously going to take probably multiple contract negotiations, but I think that should probably be the end goal if we are serious about this work, is that if it's everyone's job, then it has to actually be everyone's job. That said, while I definitely appreciate all the work that has been done here, I do have a red flag about what's missing. When we start to establish this office and this policy, it was explicitly with the idea that, while absolutely I want to have the best trained, most knowledgeable staff in the district, fundamentally, equity is not a matter of coaching or of training. This is not a educator failure. This is a system problem. And while I appreciate all the work we can do to always better train our educators, that's not why we have these inequities. And we have these inequities because of decades, if not centuries, of policy choices and system design. So I would really like us to put energy into identifying what are we structurally doing wrong. That's why we established the goals we did. It's why we didn't do as far as many districts do. Start with, let's make our curriculum more culturally diverse, so we can pat ourselves in the back. We've added a few new voices to the curriculum. We know this is about what we spend money on, whose voices do we value when we're making tough decisions. Whose voices do we, not just externally but internally, like whose voices are we bringing in to actually educate? Like, these are structural decisions that no amount of coaching, no amount of consulting, as valuable as that all may be, can solve. So I'd really like to make sure that our district's spending real energy on those kinds of issues as well.
Did you want to respond to that?
No, right on. I mean, I am in full agreement with you. I don't think there was a question.
Fair. I had Ms. Patone, and then Ms. Barish.
Why don't you go to Ms. Barish, because I think I lost track.
Okay, Ms. Barish.
Just a quick follow-up. I didn't, I left us out, but I feel very strongly that school committee members should have access to these, to this programming as well, and would love to work on how we might be able to do that beyond, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm psyched about the resources that you provided, look forward to reading books, but I think there's a lot more to it than that, so thanks.
I'm glad you said that, because you are in my notebook plan that I take my little spiral notebook. We were talking about the whole structure, everybody, so I'm glad to know you guys are willing.
We are part of everybody, so there you have it. Ms. Patone?
Thank you, through you. I think I had two. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Green for his comments. I think it was incredibly thoughtful and, also puts the onus and accountability on us as the school committee in terms of what we need to be doing. And, obviously the training is a great thing, but, we have to hold ourselves accountable. And you as the Director of Equity and Excellence, we ask for your red flags to us in terms of what we can do differently and what we can be more thoughtful about. So I just, goes both ways. You have a microphone, you have a podium, speak to us and let us know how we can and do things differently. Two things I was thinking about, and you don't necessarily even have to speak to them, but one of them is whether or not there's value in the idea of any kind of advisory group that includes parents, guardians, students around the subject of equity. That could be an advisory, whether it's to the school committee or to your work. Maybe you're already doing this stuff, but sometimes identifying, recruiting, and kind of anointing people with some level of responsibility can be really impactful, especially when you have diverse points of view represented in that. But again, it depends how you do your work and whether or not that's valuable or not. So just thinking. Then the other piece is something to think about is, and you may be already on this avenue, is scaling this coaching concept. The coaching obviously can be incredibly impactful. We have one coach, and whether or not we are kind of thinking out beyond that in terms of training administrators to be coaches or training whomever to be coaches, so that there's going to be a lot more energy out there as opposed to trying to channel it through a single person. So thank you.
Part two of what you said, that is great. I think loosely have talked about that, but the first part though, that is something that last year when was one of the things that I really wanted to do was I didn't know what we would call it. I was calling it a task force, for lack of a better term. We could change the name. But so this year, when I was looking at all the things that we wanted to do last year, like the list of stuff in my little notebook that I take with me everywhere, we had to pare it down. So that is still on the list. But we wanted to get through these things, kind of thoughtfully and hopefully effectively. And we're like, okay, we did this with the A-bar for the second-year educators. We did this with this coaching cycle. Now let's bring in this equity. I don't know what we'd call it, but yes, thank you.
Dr. Carmona?
So can I...
So I'm going to follow up on a couple of things, and I'll try to do this quickly. I'm always up for bringing more coaches in our district. I think that is an essential component of making our curriculum an equity-driven curriculum. One of the things that I'm just going to cite some data from 2022 to 2023 is called Somerville Early Childhood Data. One of the things that really pains me is to see things like this. So there are 4 categories in this document that I have: approaches to learning, language and literacy, scientific thinking, and mathematic thinking. Our kindergartners or pre-K students come in January at a 0.2, 0.3, 0.2 difference in their comparison. I'm looking at low-income students and non-low-income students. In January, there is a difference of a 0.1 or 0.2 between the two cohorts. By the time we get to June, we're talking about 2 to 3 points difference in all these categories. It is in our data right now. It is, and part of what I read from this is that despite some of our best intentions, we are seeing that when our kids are coming in with some gaps, they continue to grow as they process through the early grades. And these are early grades, all right? And so if you're going to really look at the issue of making sure that we are very equitable, coaches are essential, but also very viable curriculums, as well as making sure that literacy, math are basically structured in a ways that our teachers are ready to teach it, and our students have the right learning conditions. So in my mind, if we invest in instruction, is one of those ways in which we can actually really address the inequities in our system. If you look at the Soretta Hammond book, that's all she says is, let's be anti-racist through instruction, to making sure that our kids have an identity as intellectuals, not just through the questions that we pose as to being equitable or not, but really through means that actually transform the trajectory from whatever they are to the next level. So I just wanted to.
If I could add on to that,
Yep.
it's that dependent versus independent learner thinking, right? Like how the kids are, how we can teach them to be independent learners, not dependent on their teacher standing there by them. And a lot of that comes with, right, how you were saying, how we deliver the instruction. Is it just rote memorization? Because that's not how everybody learns type thing. So I just wanted to add on to and thank you.
I have Ms. Parrish and then Mr. Green.
Thank you. Ms. Patone mentioned, bringing students and parents or guardians into the conversation. I think that in the past, some students have been involved in professional development around equity. And I'm curious about whether there is any direct involvement of your department with student groups, whether at the high school or lower levels, and whether that's something that you see in the future, if that's not happening now.
There are direct ties between our department and student groups. The equity specialists and/or equity team members run the GSAs in the schools. The high school has an equity team, with kids on it. I think they call it Equity Club. And then the work that's being done in the K through 8, that's more of the GSA. They call it different things, Pride Group, because it's not just for LGBTQIA kids, it's for all kids. So sadly, I do go to those meetings, which is great, but sadly, I'm not the direct person with the kids anymore. So, but the department members are doing that work, yes.
Mr. Green?
First, I want to thank the superintendent for his down remarks. For Ms. Patone, I was actually one of the people who's historically been averse to the idea of an equity audit. And for me, it's less about, especially as the equity audit is a relatively new thing, what I've seen in my day job where I do racial equity work on workforce development, it's often a cop-out. It's often a cop-out. It's a way for districts and organizations to avoid doing hard work, because they're like, well, we're looking at this thing, and the results are oftentimes things that they could have just as easily asked any of their, in the case of racial equity audit, any of their black and brown constituents, their experiences, and what all the equity audit does is convert that lived experience into something that is palatable to the dominant culture group by using the language of data and research. Which isn't to say that there aren't real value to bringing in third parties with expertise to look at things. For example, I could easily see us bringing in a group like the Advancement Project or NAACP Legal Fund to overview our policy manual to look for gaps there. I could easily see bringing in people to help systematically look at our teaching and practices to help give coaching. And there are ways you can do this work that aren't, the doorstop equity report that as soon as you're done, it's obsolete, so some desk never gets looked at. And I would rather invest our time and energy in those efforts than in something which really exists less to guide work and more to reassure people we're good people. And I again, I want to emphasize the superintendent's remarks, because both his analysis of the problem, which is that, like, sure, we know that there are inequities in how people arrive to us. That is true for us and every other district in America. We as a school district can't control that. But when we're seeing those gaps literally increase in pre-K, that speaks to, again, systemic failures on our part that we should be trying to solve. But even there, we have to recognize that we're doing this in the backdrop of, and this is the reason I remind members, the reason we've originally focused on race in our equity policy in the first place is because not just in Somerville Public Schools, but in pretty much every aspect of American life, race is the largest predictor of success or failure in America. The stat we use all the time at work is that in Greater Boston, black people with an associate's degree make less than white people with a high school diploma. Like, these are not isolated problems. These are systemic failures, and if we're trying to make them small and manageable, we're probably not trying to solve them.
Thank you, through you. I just want to thank Mr. Green for sharing his thoughts on that. The equity audit had come in and out of the space for a while. I certainly wouldn't ever be supportive of anything that was performative, which is, I think, how you're kind of casting the idea of how some organizations do an equity audit. But I think what I hear from you, and I could be wrong, is just this idea of solving particular problems and having third parties come in and support our work in a very targeted way, as opposed to sort of a large generic manufactured audit, which again would not be helpful to us. But I also, from my perspective, I know I'm proud of the work that we're doing in Somerville. We're all patting each other in the back that we're doing this great stuff, but we have so much work to do, and we all know this. So I think it's about the reality checks. And if it's not performative and it's something very targeted, I could see how valuable it could be, and I look forward to whatever recommendations through the superintendent's office, through your department, come up with to say, this is the place that we really want support, and this is how we want to invest money, whether it's a large audit, a targeted audit, or whatever. So, but I want to thank Mr. Green for sharing his thoughts on that, because it's a term that just keeps coming up, equity audit, equity audit. So this is a really thoughtful conversation, so thank you.
Yes, Dr. Phillips.
Many apologies if I'm taking us too deep in the weeds. My work has been doing a lot of the equity audits around the state, and I'm the evaluator for my work, so I'm helping to evaluate all these projects. A couple things that I see is that they're really effective in places where either there is a superintendent who sees glaring inequities and nobody else does, and they're trying to move the ship. They're really good at kind of surfacing new information with which to move the ship, right? I wouldn't say that's Somerville, right? I would say here, like, we know the ship's got to move. The question is how? I have mostly seen, right, like, I think you guys all together would come up with pretty close to recommendations that an external entity would come up with. And then what's hard about an equity audit is then enacting those recommendations, right? It's hard with any report you're going to get. It's going to say do these 4 things. Like, doing them is great, but it's hard to get to that. So I would caution us about just doing an equity audit writ large. I do totally agree with Mr. Green that if we have a discrete equity-related problem that we cannot figure out what is the root cause of nor how to solve, that might be the perfect thing to do equity audit on. But that's just my experience. Happy to talk more if anyone wants to.
Thank you for that. Did you want to respond?
No, I think I wanted to thank Kaylee and Heidi for the.
All right, I think.
Okay, well, thank you, Kaylee, for the report, as well as Heidi. And now I'm going to have, thank you very much. I'm going to have Assistant Superintendent of Operations, Chad Massa, to share the monthly OST update.
Thank you, Dr. Carmona, through the chair. So as part of our ongoing commitment to provide you with our out-of-school time programming and updates, this is, installment number 2. And at the beginning of it, as you have seen in your packet, it focuses on community school staffing, the enrollment wait lists for each school in a comparison from September, through October. But there are a few highlights that I just want to point out to everyone as we move forward. Staffing has increased. We have 3 new lead teachers, 2 new assistant teachers, and 4 new high school interns, which I think is great. You may wonder why the numbers haven't shifted very much, and part of that is because most buildings were understaffed already, and this was just to basically catch up in terms of staffing, but we still need more staff. At our last meeting, we talked about a focus on our Genziano in terms of the large wait list, and so just some updates on that. We did hire a new lead teacher, but again, that site was already very well understaffed. So in hiring this new lead teacher, it didn't really help us catch up. It put us in a better position, but we still need more additional lead teachers really to open up additional groups, which means lowering the wait list. But a couple of interesting things about the wait list that myself, OST Director Rosanna Parabello, and Janae Riley, who is our Manager of Programs and Partnerships, some things that we found out in terms of the wait lists, especially at our Genziano. We had 4 families, they requested to be removed from the wait list because they're enrolled in other district programs or non-district affiliated programs. So you'll see the number went from 29 to 25. But an important piece that we found out through a survey with waitlisted families is 16 of those 25 families, their children participate in other programming, but they want to remain on the wait list in case they can get into community schools. So I think what that shows you is what the wait-listed number actually is might not be the true wait list of students who do not have any programming. One of the things that we're going to do now is we're going to look at the Kennedy in the same way in terms of surveying parents that are on a wait list to see if they have other programming, if they want to remain on the wait list, because that's valuable data for us to have. When you look at East Somerville, in terms of the number of students who are enrolled, there was a 10-student drop, and that's because El Sistema started programming. When community school started, El Sistema had not started yet, and once El Sistema began, students chose to participate in El Sistema. And like I said, we're looking at Kennedy as our next large project in terms of looking to reduce that wait list, because I believe they have 28. So if you take a look at the second page, it has your wait lists. Most of the buildings are pretty stagnant in terms of where the numbers are. You see East Somerville went up a little bit. That's due to additional enrollment. When you have a wait list and new families enroll, they automatically go on the wait list. But we're going to take a look at the Kennedy. But in the meantime, some of the things that we've done with the mayor's $500,000 investment, some of the things we're doing right now really to offset the families at the Argenziano that are on the wait list. We're opening up different programs. We're looking at 2 piano classes, a guitar class through Village Music, and those are on Thursdays and Fridays, and you can see that they highlight and they service different age groups, different grade levels. And we're also looking at opening up a Dungeons and Dragons after-school program at our Genziano as well. They have one at the Brown, and we're very happy to offer that as well to our Genziano students. And then there's a new program at the Healy with Farrington Nature Link, the environmental leadership program for students. So in an effort to try to really reduce wait lists, but also offer different kinds of programming to really speak to the whole child, we're looking at these different types of programs. And then we have some that are going to be coming January on. And again, using the mayor's generous $500,000 investment, we're going to be looking at Pretzel Kids Yoga. We're going to be looking at Spanish is Fun. We're looking at a Loop program at the Kennedy, which is a STEM program, and that's a pretty large program, so we should be able to do some exciting things at the Kennedy and to reduce that wait list. And then looking at John Apollon Expressions. That's a contemporary dance company. When I was principal at Winter Hill, I brought them in. We have a pretty close tie with the company, and they've done wonderful things. They've now expanded to the high school, and what we're looking at is having that be a program similar to El Sistema for next year. So a year-long program that will extend into the summer to really offer different experiences for kids. So when you take a look at some of these programs, it's not just all about academics, it's about looking at the whole child, which we think is very important. It ties into what, the school committee's goals are, but it's also important for students to have different choices in things. And then the last piece is, we all know that next year there will be early release on Wednesdays, right, 1 o'clock. So we're looking at creating programming at different schools, but I want to be very, very clear right now that this does not mean that there will be programming for every single student in this district. And I just want to make that clear because I don't want to give the assumption that we're going to have programming for 5,000 students because it's just not possible. But we're working very hard to have similar programs at schools, same amounts of programs at schools, so parents may have something to do after school, but again, I just want to caution everybody, this is not an opportunity to have programming for everyone because it's just not possible to do that. Next month, when I come back, we'll have September, October, November for community schools. Hopefully, we'll see a change in numbers, but we'll also talk a little bit about the school clubs that have opened up, and we'll get more specific in terms of some of these other programs of when they are starting the second half of the school year. We think it's very important just to be upfront and honest and give you a monthly update on where we are with after-school programming. When we're always looking to expand, but we want to make sure we expand for the right reasons and that we're giving quality programming to students and families. So with that, I will take any questions.
Appreciate the update. I have a question. The classes you're talking about to offset the after-school program, just to clarify, most of them are just an hour after school. So there's something to do, but they're not necessarily replacing the childcare that people look at.
Correct.
Thank you. Ms. Patel.
Thank you, through you. Thank you for the update and all the data, super helpful. I had two questions. One is about, we have a certain lump sum of money. Some of that went to this programming, that actual literal direct services to kids. That's amazing. It's probably a ton of work to create this. Is that stuff going to be sustainable? Are we able to continue that next year? Will we have that money? I mean, I know you can't answer that, but in terms of are we going to budget for that kind of stuff? The second question is about, in the summer programming, there's energy put into recruiting, right? So we recruit particular students that we really think are going to benefit from summer programming, and I think we maybe don't get everyone that we want. But my understanding is after school is more that's opt-in, like whoever comes, and we make that available. So it's a concept of sort of extended school day for some kids, and that I'm curious the thoughts on whether or not we want to have or is it viable to have a more active recruiting model for some of this type of programming for some of our students? Because I noticed the numbers, there's certain schools that don't have wait lists, and is that just a cultural thing? Is that because we're not recruiting kids? I know a lot of work happened at the East to recruit families, which I was really thrilled about, particularly families where English is not their first language. So anyway, there's just a concept, and I'm just curious the thoughts from the educators, and I don't necessarily need an answer, but I'm curious about that.
Through the chair, so to answer your first question, we're hopeful that the money will continue. It is very helpful, and it gives us an opportunity to really create different opportunities for students that we wouldn't necessarily be able to pay for. In terms of your second question, your second point, that's one of the things that we're talking about is how we're going to recruit, students for these programs on the Wednesdays. Our hope is that we can sustain these programs throughout the year, more so than just Wednesdays, but right now our focus is to make sure we have programming on Wednesdays with knowing that early release is every single Wednesday, but we're also going to look to expand, throughout the course of each week. But we had a conversation. We have a conversation every week in terms of the planning, and that was one of the pieces. What are we going to do in terms of recruitment of students for these programs? Is there going to be criteria around hardship? So it's evolving. I don't have a specific answer for you yet because it's early in November, but it's on our mind.
Mr. Green?
Two questions, I think, both quite related to what Ms. Stone's last question. One is that I noticed that for the East Somerville and the Winter Hill, current attendance is actually lower than it was in September, but I'm not seeing a equivalent shift in the wait list numbers, and I was just curious about that. And the second question is about Mr. Stone's question about priorities. In particular, when we look at these lists and we look at them, say, by grade level, has there been thought to prioritizing, say, younger kids who, who more likely need supervision than older kids, but also to the point of, our equity conversations, we know back when he was the fellow, actually I think it's a dissertation on it too, Dr. Curley did research on the fact that one of the biggest inequities we've seen in early education is just amount of time spent in learning between low-income students and middle-income students, especially in those early grades. So has there been thought to your point that we can't, as much as it might be wonderful, it's not happening this year or next year, we can't provide services to 5,000 students. Has there been thought to perhaps prioritizing younger kids, low-income kids, et cetera?
Through the chair, so your first question in terms of the wait lists, I think what we need to really do is we need to survey the parents like we did with our Genziano to really get a true number. I think with the East, what is interesting is, 10 students opted out of community schools, so they weren't on the wait list. They were actually in community schools and opted out, and then we transferred some kids over. But we had new kids come on, and when you have a wait list, the wait list only increases. In terms of, but we're going to get to the bottom of what the actual numbers are in terms of how many of these wait listed families actually have zero programming, or are they involved in other programs, but just want to stay on community schools wait list because, that's the higher priority for families. In terms of the second, I think you're right. When we look at the programs that we're offering, we want to make sure we have a wide range in terms of grade levels, but we also want to prioritize, maybe K-2, to get K-2 families more involved in what we're doing after school. But it's something we will flesh out once we get the specific programs on board with us. But it's something that we're thinking about for sure.
Any other questions? Yeah?
Through the chair, so there is an interesting dynamic here because this touches upon the earlier conversation around equity. We also know that I hear from most families who already have the means and ask me for what is the story with after-school programs, right? So there is a little bit of discrepancy in terms of how do you also, from your vantage point, advocate for families, and then how we try to do that the same way. One of the things that I think we need to do is looking into different ways in which we provide, like we used to have 21st century programs that actually were just designed to support kids who are Title I schools or kids who actually need the support. So you cited the point that there's a lot of data that says that, the access, the gap of the opportunity gap grows because part of that is that as some of our kids spend their time playing outside, engage in things that are exciting, but sometimes the replication of the curriculum doesn't happen at home. And so that continues to build the gap. And so yes, and I also want you to, advocate in terms of the needs of those families that we also don't hear from. And so when we have to shift our emphasis into making sure that everyone has a space in the after-school program usually has been driven by the voices of the families that usually have resources. So I think it's not I don't want to create a divide here, but I just want to share with you the complexity of the current dynamics. We do believe that in order for us to really make a dent in terms of creating some parity as far as outcomes goes, we have to create more opportunities for kids to have access to learning outside, in the school, and at all times. So, yes.
Ms. Patel?
Thank you, Chair, through you. Just a follow-up to the superintendent. Is it unreasonable? So we have this $500,000, and some of it's clearly going to direct service, which is amazing. Can some of it go towards planning a program and making a proposal about, like, hey, if we, over the next 3 years, I mean, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow, we invest in this type of programming that's targets at these students, and we bring it to the school committee, we bring it to the city and say, this is how we want to do this work with a third-party provider, however we want to do it. I mean, I'm encouraging you, I'm pleading with you to do that with this money. Use this money to plan as much as you can to create the type of program that you believe will make a difference in students' lives, particularly for our families that are not always accessing this out-of-school time programming. And I think we've seen a difference, for example, in the Winter Hill and in the East. I may be wrong, that because of that recruiting that happened very specifically to whatever program we already had, there's more families that are taking advantage of it. Like when I see that there's only, 78 students at the Healy doing after school, that is some of our most neediest kids. They used to have a Boys and Girls Club program there. I'm not advocating for that program again, but it was basically like $30 for the year. And there were tons of kids that participated in that. Now, granted, there were two different scales of programming, but I just really think this is an opportunity to plan and ask for investment if we really think this is something that will make a difference for our students. So,
do you want to respond?
Through the chair. So just, a reminder to everyone, the 78, when you look at these charts, this is just community schools. It doesn't mean that there aren't, 200 more students and families participating in other programs, but this is just specifically, community schools, because if you think about it, that has been our data point for forever, I think. In Somerville, we've always had community schools, but we also know that if we want to service more students, we have to find different programming as well. And that's, a big piece of what the team is definitely working on.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. Dr. Carmona, our next topic.
Thank you, Mr. Massa, for your report. And we're going to switch to district notes and highlights. After that, we have a building update. And after that, I want to bring, I know there is a new business conversation, and there is a conversation about the extended campus lunch policy. I want to have Mrs. Kirsten come in at that time also to share a little bit of an update on what happened last week. And so I wanted to put those two together, but that's at the end of my report. So I'm gonna switch to district notes and highlights, and I hate reading from this document, but that's what I will do. So I'll try to do my best. I'm gonna give you a couple of updates, and then Mr. Massa and Dr. Boston Davis will share some updates as well. So I wanted to start with enrollment, our enrollment. For 2024-25 school year, the team has been hard at work preparing for events for prospective kindergarten and pre-kindergarten and kindergarten families. So this event is gonna kick off on November 14 and 16 with information sessions. So for those out there, please pay attention. There will be 3 open house days, one each in November, December, and January. And those are for families and community members interested in visiting any of our pre-K to 8th grade schools for information and tours. Please visit the enrollment office website for more details. So again, these are our times for folks to come and see the buildings and see, also get familiar with the spaces and the surroundings of the community. We also want to celebrate a couple of things. So this week, our schools will not be in session on November 10th in observation of Veterans Day. And thank you to all our community members who have served our country and those who continue to serve. Community members practicing Hinduism celebrate Diwali on November 12th, and members of the Sikh community celebrate Bandi Chhor Divas on November 12th. And Transgender Awareness Week is next Wednesday, November 13 to 19. I'm going to have Mr. Massa continue.
All right, through the chair, we have 3 new outdoor spaces, outdoor fields at our schools that we're excited about. West Somerville Neighborhood School, they had a ribbon cutting on October 24th with their new schoolyard, which has 3 great new outdoor spaces for students. The same week, there was a ribbon cutting at the high school in honor of Somerville High School alum and Olympian Phil Rivas Sr., where the field next to the high school was dedicated in his name. And then on November 14th, we're looking forward to the ribbon cutting for the Brown Schoolyard, and that will be at 2:30, and we hope to see everybody there because that is very exciting. Our next update is around Cradles to Crayons. They've been very generous to us, over the years, and they've donated school supplies for all of our students. They also donated and delivered fall and winter clothing over the last few weeks for students who are experiencing challenges, affording winter gear. So I want to thank our volunteer coordinator, Jen Capuano, our SFLC liaisons, and community volunteers who helped unload and organize these materials. Together, your work and these donations help provide important resources for our students, and we are very, very grateful for that. And just some upcoming events. Come support the Somerville High School Co-ed Unified Basketball Team at their next game on November 9th at Salemwood School Fieldhouse at 4 p.m. This team is a mix of students with and without intellectual disabilities who really train and compete together while representing the high school. Please check the athletics website for calendar updates, but this is truly a remarkable team and a remarkable group of young students that are just amazing. So if you get a chance to go see them, please do. Registration is open for middle grades and high school athletics. Students at the high school must attend a medical clearance event before joining a team, which is standard practice. Students in the middle grades, basketball will attend their medical clearance event on the first day of practice. Again, another standard to be able to participate. And for more information, visit the SPS Athletics website. We also have 2 City of Somerville Health and Human Service flu vaccines at our schools this month. November 8th from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the West Somerville Neighborhood School, and November 16th from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. at the East Somerville Community School. So both of those schools will have flu vaccine clinics. The enrollment office is hosting an information session about enrolling a student in pre-kindergarten or kindergarten on November 14th and 15th. There will be morning sessions online and afternoon sessions in person. Please visit our website, the enrollment website, to learn more. And our important safety drills will be conducted in all our pre-K to 12 grade schools during the week of November 13th through 17th, which is next week. The drills will include our lockdown procedure practice and our secure and hold procedure practice. Information has been sent to all families in our 4 targeted languages, and principals have been supplied with age-appropriate materials that teachers and staff can use to gently explain the importance of the drills without alarming students. And with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Boston-Davis.
Thank you, through the chair. So we have a couple of upcoming half-days and school holidays. November 7th, tomorrow is Election Day, and there will be no school for students. November 10th is Veterans Day, and there will be no school for students or staff, and all district offices will be closed. November 15th, next Wednesday, is an early release day for all students. And we have some shout outs to our SPS athletics department. Our teams have had an incredibly strong fall season, and we have 4 teams who won the Greater Boston League Championships. So that's varsity boys cross country, varsity boys soccer, varsity girls soccer, and middle grades boys cross country team. So let's give it up for them. And our Somerville High School golf team won the GBL Open Tournament. The athletics department also continues to develop the Inclusive Unified Sports, as Mr. Mazza just discussed, program that offers students with intellectual disabilities more opportunities to play in competitive athletics alongside their peers. Also, we want to just say great job to Director Stanley Vieira and Assistant Athletics Director Indira Ivora for winning, and award-winning athletic trainer Michelle Kelly, who was, as you remember, named last year's MSSADA Athletic Trainer of the Year, and our Assistant Athletic Trainer, Gabriela Vieira. You will see this hard-working department at the high school during the day and at our sporting events on the weekends and the evenings. So thank you to our athletics department for everything you do. With that, thank you. With that, I'll turn it back to the superintendent.
So now that the field is open by the high school, does that mean that the separate entrance for Next Way Full Circle is open?
Through the chair, which is you. Yes, the main entrance for Next Way Full Circle is open. The driveway is not open yet because that area the field has to be turned over to the school, but yes.
And hopefully that will be soon, because I know the auto mechanics are hoping
We are hoping that will be soon.
Great, thank you. Is there any other, oh, sorry, Dr. Ackman? Yep.
Thank you. Through the chair, where does the golf team practice?
The what
Looks like Miss Barish knows.
I believe they practice at Stone Meadows in Lexington, just off Route 2. There is a bus that provides as many transportation for as many team members as it can accommodate.
All right.
Great.
Dr. Comano?
Thank you, Mr. Mazza and Mrs. Davis, Dr. Davis. So the last, one of the last bullets in my report is about building updates. And last Friday, we sent a flyer to families to let them know the good news that the Sycamore Street building will not be reoccupied. I think that many of you probably received that information. So basically, given the structural needs as well as, it's a structural sound space, but given the fact that we are in the process of determining what's the next step for that building, our commitment is going to be to stay at the Winter Hill, at the Edgerly for at least the next 4 to 5 years. We understand, our understanding is that this process takes between 5 to 6 years, and so most likely we'll be at the Edgerly for that amount of time. That also means that we have to make sure that the community is together, and so in order to do that, we will be renovating the boxing club, and we will be bringing the pre-K and K students into the Edgerly. So that work is starting already in terms of looking at procurement of resources as well as scheduling the different vendors that we will need. So the idea is to do the work throughout the summer and hopefully have it ready by the end of August. And that is in regard to those to the developments to that building, to those 2 buildings. On Wednesday, we will be meeting with the Winter Hill community to talk about both the work that was done at the Edgerly, the mitigation work, as well as the work that the reports that were actually generated around the asbestos at the Winter Hill at Sycamore. And also, we will be talking about the specifics of what is happening at both buildings with the staff that is on Wednesday. We'll have some experts to talk about asbestos and to make sure that we answer every question and every concern that the teachers have. And On Thursday, we'll meet with the community to talk about both an update on the asbestos situation as well as what is the future for the building, and we will get into a description, a deeper description of the K-8 planning process. And then we have a meeting in which we're going to start the engagement with the community, which originally was at the November 29, but we're still landing on the right date, and it's probably December the 5th right now as it stands. So possibly on December the 5th, we will be having the conversation about the community engagement. We will be hiring or recruiting a firm that will do that process for us, so we make sure that that is also spearheaded through the school department. Those are the two questions, the two statements that I want to make, but I also wanted to bring up the conversation that we started last week around the K-8 master plan discussion. And I don't know if you remember, but briefly, during the conversation, there was a question about what is the vision around the K-8 master planning process? And so I wanted to touch upon that a little bit. I know that this might, hopefully this doesn't lead us into a rabbit hole discussion, but I feel it's important for you to provide your opinion and also listen to some of the thoughts that I have around this process. And since the beginning, since I came in, actually prior of my arrival, I remember that there was a declaration of intent that was submitted to MSBA in July, I believe, and it was around how to make sure that we support the construction of the two buildings that needed to be addressed, which was the Winter Hill as well as the Brown School. And so the intention was to basically solve for X, and in that case, X was those two buildings that needed attention. And so in my mind, that has been the impetus to do the work that we have been doing, is responding to the challenges that we have and addressing a real immediate need, which is finding a house and a home for our community, our Winter Hill community. And so that's what we did. We're at the Edgerly. It's not perfect. We will continue to address some of the issues that we are having at the Edgerly. And we are confident that in collaboration with the faculty, we'll continue to do so. It is not ideal, and we understand that, but it is what we have so far, and hopefully we can continue to make improvements. The question around vision for our buildings is one that I think it deserves a little bit of a pause. And I want to kind of give you an idea of some of my thinking around this. So when I first, the discussion started, the question was, should we look at other models, not just a K-8 model, but an elementary or a middle school model? And one of the challenges that question brings about is that it is almost impossible to identify there's no evidence that I actually have found, unless any of you have some evidence to share, that one model is better over the other, that an elementary versus a middle school model, or an elementary with a middle school component is better than a K-8 model. In fact, some of the evidence that I've been looking into suggests that students' academic gains are stronger under a pre-K-8 model. There are many pros and cons for both. So if you are looking for making sure you minimize the transitions of students going from elementary into middle school, a K-8 model, it offers more options. If you're planning on providing scale and resources and more socializing for middle schools, the K-8 model with two strands, the way we have it, is very limited. And that's true from my own personal experience running K-8 schools, and also from some of the data that there are some limitations for middle school students. However, there are also ways to minimize that impact by creating conditions to bring middle school students together, and that is well documented in the research. The other thing is that after the pandemic, many districts are having challenges with the large middle school models. I think that many of the kids who were impacted by the pandemic seem to have some socializing challenges, and when you group 500 to 1,000 kids into a middle school, you end up with challenges. And the other challenge that I wanted to highlight for you is that the density of Somerville speaks to the idea, or kind of takes advantage, or the way our schools are positioned takes advantage of the density. So most of our students, 60 to 70% of our students attend the schools that are within their vicinity. If we decide that we're going to switch that and we're going to say we're going to create 2 middle schools in the district, let's for thinking's sake, we say the Winter Hill becomes a middle school, and then another school in the west becomes a middle school, so we actually have representation in both ends of the city. By doing that, you also would have to repurpose all the K through 8 schools into elementary schools. And I do not know what is the current appetite from our families to say, yes, that is what I want to do. There are programs that also would be directly impacted. Our Unidos program would be not because it currently exists in a K through 8 environment. It would have to be split into an elementary and possibly a middle school. And then having a dual language program in a middle school as part of a regular program is very difficult to make it sustainable. And that also the same applies to our different programs that are currently at the Winter Hill. What are the programs that we have? The AIM program, which goes all the way from K through middle school, and the newcomers programs as well. So I just wanted to highlight to you that the idea of thinking of a K through 4 or K through 5, a middle school versus a K through 8 will require a significant shift in direction. Also, one of the things that isn't clear to me, and I'm open to a conversation, is what is the deciding criteria to determine, let's pretend for a second that we engage with the community on a survey around this, and what is the deciding criteria that we will have to determine we go one way or the other? Is it 60% versus 40%? Is it 55 versus 30? What is the mechanism that we will determine, assuming that we embark in this process? And the second thing is that we will have to actually shift the attention of the work that has been done so far. We'll have to ask someone to get into the process and get a really through deep assessment of what would it mean for our community. As you know, Somerville is not a community that just takes anytime I put something out, I get 10 responses saying, hey, did you look at this? Did you look at that? So there is such a knowledge within the community that every time there's something that we put out, we get a response from architects, lawyers, and so there is a deep commitment to digging under the hood when it comes to anything that we do. So in my mind, if we are exploring this, we'll have to actually do it in a very serious way with the company actually that did the work, did not have an inquiry around the model that we have. They only had an inquiry around a gap analysis, around our locations, and but it was never a question around one model versus the other. And yes, I think I know, Andre, you're raising your hand, so I'm going to pause right there.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm going to start with the first of your two questions is, what's the criteria you use to decide? And I think whatever we do, maintain the status quo, quote, whatever, the criteria is going to be, we as a body have to do our job, make some judgment calls. As you said, to open up, there are no clear right answers on this. This is going to be a matter of values, a matter of finances. It's going to be a subjective decision. And I know that we as a district, we as a body, love the idea of consensus. But I don't know there is a sustainable consensus on this other than we're going to have to make some hard calls. The easiest answer, obviously, is we know we need to replace 2 buildings. We just replace those 2 buildings on site. But But we also know there's challenges with that. Like, the Brown footprint isn't big enough to build a 21st century school. And so if we're just guided by trying to recreate what we already have, we know where we're going to end up. And I'm not sure that, like, when asked as a representative of the taxpayers of Somerville, when asked, to think equity hat, that just replacement we have, it's hard for me to justify spending what it would take to rebuild the Brown, given the population it serves, the numbers of students. Like, there is no clean, easy answer. And given that, I think we owe it to the community to do the depth of research to come up with the best combination of answers is. It doesn't necessarily mean going to a middle school model. It doesn't necessarily mean it may be the right answer is to rebuild 2 schools and find places to put them. But I think we have to think systemically and ask those tough questions and then give tough answers. It's the only way that we can live up to our professed values, I think.
Through the chair, yes, you're right. And so that is part of the K-8 assessment. So that is those calculations of either build alone, build here, build combine here, build at the same location. Those are calculations that will be discussed through the K-8 model. So that's not just rebuilt in one location. And there are pros and cons for many of these options, and cost is also a significant challenge in terms of the different variables you have. I also reached out to MSBA to mention to them that I was going to bring this exploration to you. They were very concerned that this could delay any of their calculations in terms of the trajectory that we have. I said, well, we're just exploring the conversation to make sure that we also have a very thorough assessment of in what direction we're heading. But what you just raised, though, that's part, regardless of what we do, that's part of the calculation that is being presented, that will be presented at some point.
Ms. Green, and then Ms. Patton.
I appreciate that. I think part of it is also that we know what families want. Every family wants to maintain their current school and status quo to the greatest extent possible, right? The Winhill families want a new Winter Hill at 151 Sycamore. The Brown families want a new Brown school. Neither community is really interested in merger. Like, we know what they want en masse. And we know that somewhere, something has to give. So I think, this isn't going to be a decision we can just, where we can do a study, we can do a research, and an answer will emerge out of it, and we can just do that kind of thing. We're going to have to take tough calls.
Ms. Patton.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I want to thank the superintendent for bringing this up. It's a big question mark. I really appreciate you sharing what research that you've seen around, whether or not there's pros and cons, and that was my understanding. It's, there's advantages and disadvantages, this in particular around middle school models versus K-8s. I think that for myself personally, and I think we've discussed this offline, is that if there's some evidence that somehow one of these models will really move the needle on equity, then that would be compelling to me, but it sounds like that evidence doesn't exist. So that we can, any kind of structure that will change that we would make would somehow move us forward on closing opportunity gaps, improving access. But I don't know if that's true or not, but that for me is sort of the bellwether in terms of why it would ever be on my plate to ever consider some significant structural change. Because we know, as Mr. Green said, parents right now want what they have. But we also want to acknowledge things like parents in all of the schools are frustrated that there's only one pre-K in each school. And there is no room to put another pre-K in any of these schools. And that's, in my opinion, there's possibly an equity issue associated with that. We have one program at the Capuano, and then we have a single school, pre-K, but I know I keep bringing up pre-K, and I feel like I'm a little bit of I'm beating a horse. I apologize for that. So, that's another space. But for me, the big picture vision can also be considered around is having sort of centralized programs, single programs like AIM, like Newcomer, in single schools. Is that the best model for us? And it might be for our scale. I don't know. You are the educational professionals. But in some schools, they actually distribute that. They might have one in the east, they might have one in the west. Or is the economy of scale appropriate to have it in a single model? So for me, one, for making such a significant change to middle schools would really require some strong evidence, because that would upend everyone, and basically no one would be happy for at least the short term. And again, our job is not about necessarily only today, but it's at 10, 20, 40, 50 years out around buildings. So the fact that thinking about our programming and how we place it and whether or not it's equitable, including pre-K, including all these programs, is important to me, and in some ways more important than the middle school versus K-8 question. So that's just my opinion, sharing it, but I'm looking forward to any kind of evidence and data that you can share that would teach me more.
Ms. Dion, and then Dr. Phillips.
I'm sorry, can we open some windows? It's like getting really warm, and it's getting difficult to stay focused because it's just like really warm. I don't know which windows are able to open.
I honestly don't know.
Sorry.
It is warm in here.
Oh yeah, when you come up the stairs, there's a jar, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. Maybe they aren't openable. We did. She's gone, just buried in there.
Oh, there you are. Woo.
Yeah, wow. Oh, and Miss Barish did it too, not to be outdone.
You know what? That deserves it.
It is warm here. Dr. Phillips, you had a question, comment?
I do agree with my colleagues. Like, I think, we're going to be gone probably when these buildings are built, but the kids are still going to be here, and the kids and families are still going to be here. And I think we do a disservice to the community if we don't at least say, what are the pain points with our buildings right now? And like, what can we do to make it better? And I totally hear, right? Middle school is a pain point. We can probably resolve it without radically altering our K-8 model. Seems like a pain point might be also clustering, like Ms. Patone said, right? Clustering some of our highest needs populations in different places. At least talking about what they are, how we might solve them, feels like we shouldn't just not do it because it's going to take a lot of time and create controversy. It feels like it's a worthwhile exercise, even if at the end of the day we say, this is a huge can of worms and we should close it.
Mr. Rain, and then Dr. Ackman.
I agree with my colleagues. I would also throw out, however, there are things we can do in the meantime. We've made the correct decision not to re-enter Sycamore, so we can tear it down now, right? Like, that's a process that's going to take months whenever we start. But if we know we're not going back to that building, it's a step we can take right now while we wait for things to happen. So I think we can still think of these things in parallel tracks, and whatever we can do ASAP, we should do. And if that saves us 6 months down the line, that's 6 months where kids can be in their buildings sooner. So I would say that while we're having conversations, if there are things we know we're going to do, we should just do them.
Dr. Ackman?
I think, at least Ms. Patone's comment made me think of this. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but as someone who now lives in a 5-minute walking distance to a third of the district schools, one of the things that I keep thinking about is I know the city also has buildings that are in disrepair, that are unused around our very small city. And I'm wondering, my understanding is they want that building there. is there a chance for like an exchange? Because I would love for there to be more building, more in the middle of the city, more in the west of the city. Like our schools are clustered, and we need to spread that out as well.
Ms. Patone?
I think this is a little bit possibly what, through you, Chair, what Mr. Green also references. Some of this is just going to boil down to how much it costs. And to build whatever it is we envision building, whether it's rebuilding the Winter Hill on its current site, it's building something at the Trum site, which I know has been floated around a lot of times, somehow rebuilding something at the Brown site, or something somewhere else in some imaginary space that is going to come out of this report. That's something that's going to factor pretty heavily on the decision, is that different solutions are going to have very different price tags. So, you know, renovating the Brown and rebuilding the Winter Hill is going to look very different than possibly building one building, or putting a pre-K where the Brown is, or whatever fantasy we come up with. So that's just something I think just needs to be said and put in the ether, because it's hard to have visions and whether or not we as a community are necessarily going to want to afford to have that type of vision, especially as we have to rebuild the 1895 building and the safety building and all the other buildings out there. So I think it's our responsibility as a school committee and as the administration to put forward whatever educational vision that we see is going to be most valuable to make the case for whatever investment that we want to have, and we have to be somewhat creative. So thank you.
Mr. Green?
Just to build on Mr. Patone's point, I also think it's important for us to remember how we got here, right? We got here by decades and decades of making short-term building decisions, because that's all we could afford, right? People tried, but you could ask the administration, they'd be blunt with you. They were trying to build 50 years of buildings in 5 years. The reason we have now the best comprehensive high school in the state is because in the 80s, when the vocational building was no longer usable, we couldn't afford to do anything but move it to Somerville High. These were not decisions made because we had the opportunity to think. This is decades of reactive thinking up to the original building of the Winter Hill School when the city was broke in the 70s, and they built the building on the cheap. We owe it to future school committees and future city councils and future mayors if we can avoid putting them in that position, doing so. And that means being strategic, being thoughtful, and looking past just our immediate pain, as real as it is, towards what is best for the children of Somerville not yet born.
Through the chair. So, and definitely, I hear that, and I feel that the solution to the question of the answer of, are we building towards the future? Are we building a long-lasting tradition for our community? Is not necessarily a K through 8 versus an elementary or middle school. When I hear a vision for buildings, I always think, well, shouldn't they be sustainable? Shouldn't they be green? Shouldn't they have spaces for kids to interact? Like, that's what I look at when we talked about vision for a building. When we're talking about, our instruction, our rigor has to be those kids that I'm showing you here that are actually starting with little gains and are growing. We owe it to the teachers to give them the tools to create the curriculum that is going to support our communities. And so there are bigger things that I can guarantee you that we're going to make a mistake, and in 10 years people will say, what were those doofus thinking about? But because I think it's hard to say we can account for those complexities. Even the enrollment is one thing that is changing, and so and we're trying to use the best science around that, and it might be that we might not get it right, but nationwide and worldwide, the projections of enrollment seem to be declining across the board, and we are counting on that. It could be we have a wave, and then someone will say, you guys actually were not thinking, you couldn't see the future. How come you couldn't see the future? So I think that we're bound to make some mistakes around that. But what we can also commit is to creating spaces where that are looking towards the future, spaces that are green, spaces that are sustainable. I feel that if we're looking for a vision, is can we create spaces where instruction also allows us to be more creative around instruction, so kids can have can play the whole game of learning instead of just having the bits and pieces of learning that often our classrooms force us to do. So I want to kind of land this plane somewhere, is that right? So originally the question was, I am going to follow up with Rich and the company that did some of this. The challenge is that I don't think there's such a thing as, let's just start just the conversation in Somerville, is that right? Because in order to do that, you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper to get into also do we have the right answer? And so that is the thing that worries me also, with very limited bandwidth and me in a new year, an entry plan process, and also adding another, foreseeing the future around our building complexity. So I'm just worried about what is the depth of that request and the depth of that analysis. So I'm going to leave it up to you, friends, to guide me in that work.
I also just want to say, in theory, if we're building flexible buildings for the future, then that should give us the capacity in the future to change programming or move things around if we're building with that in mind. I don't know. Maybe that's just optimistic of me, but...
Through the chair, I think that the next process that is coming, the same thing that the high school went through, is what kind of building do we want? I mean, that's going to come down to price, but that's where we as a community might have a say in terms of what kind of a school do we want. The only thing is that it's not that the sky is the limit, because it's going to cost us some money. The more, complex, and I don't know much about buildings, but I think it's going to come to a matter of money. But I definitely would love to see a building that is net zero. Is it called net zero? The ones that are zero emissions, but those are very expensive. So that's a different conversation. But your thought around can it be flexible to house the students and then change if it needs to? That would be a great exercise. And I don't know. I guess we should pursue that process as well at some point.
All right. Anything else? All right. Oh, Mr. Green?
Small thing before we move topics off buildings. I just want to echo the public comment today that with the decision to stay in, again, I think the correct decision to stay at Edgerly until the new building is ready, that should come a commitment from the city to provide busing for as long as that requires, and that commitment should come from the city ASAP, so that parents and students can plan accordingly. I wish either representative of the city government were still here, but I do believe that's something we need to make clear now is the expectation.
Through the chair, in talking to Courtney about the principal of the Winter Hill, the current structure that we have of having the kids wait for a round of the bus that comes back and picks them up is somewhat unsustainable, because we are counting on Parks and Rec to provide the support at the end of the day, and it creates all kind of challenges. So the thing that we have faced in the past is the issue of shortages of bus drivers and buses. So, we will look into that. I think I hear loud and clear that seems to be the desire of the community to continue with the transportation. I also am curious as to who are we serving with the transportation. So when we talked about equity, is that something that, if we don't have enough buses, are there other ways to look at that question of who is taking the bus right now? But that's a second level. That's a second layer of assessment on our assistance. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that the current structure of the buses will. In other words, we're going to have to get 2 more buses if we're going to do what we're doing right now, because the current system doesn't work for the Winter Hill.
Mr. Green?
I would throw out again the possibility of giving every family at the Winter Hill a bus pass, because there are buses that go down Broadway, et cetera, so that people could bring their kids via bus as well. So yeah, if the current system is unsustainable, we can look at other options and I think, you know, we were to do something like a bus pass for every Winter Hill family. I think that's got some inherent equity benefits, because the people who would most likely benefit from it are families for whom a bus pass is perhaps even an extravagance.
Oh, Ms. Barish?
I'm reflecting on the fact that if pre-K and K classrooms are moved to the Edgerly building, that will change the busing needs anyway, because they're not going to have to be going to 2 different schools. So hopefully that will help streamline things. And I wonder also if at a certain point, I know we're not going to bus every kid to school like some districts, but I wonder if at a certain point it makes sense for us to have a bus or 2 buses of our own. I mean, you know, full-size, full-capacity buses and full-time drivers, because it seems like this comes up again and again in various situations.
Mr. Green?
The other thing I would throw out is, you know, while I hope that the EMA see a resolution calling for an audit of bus contracting passes, and I hope that audit at least some changes, it seems to me likely that a 5-year contract to run this service would be more appealing to bus companies than the kind of ad hoc thing we did this year. So hopefully, if we move with proactively and stuff, we may be able to make a deal that is more appealing.
All right, I think we are now ready to move
Great,
on.
thank you. So yes, thank you for your attention to these matters. Your feedback is critical. I just wanted to switch to a relevant recent episode that happened, and the reason why I wanted to bring it up is that I know some of you have received feedback from the community. I have seen some of the response in social media. We have, Mrs. Kirsten and myself have responded to probably 10 emails directly to parents, and I am committed to responding to as many as we have to. And I think I just want to highlight that there were a couple of things that happened, you know, on that Thursday, that we had 5 events outside of the school that were scary, in which we had adults trying to prevent students from engaging physically with each other. And I am very proud and very humbled to be working with Kristen to, you know, she called a secure and hold around 11, something like that, but early in the morning, in order to make sure that kids did not come out of the building and stumble upon a situation like that, or just to make sure that we contain students. And so in my mind, that was a quick reaction. That was a great reaction. When we met with the faculty, they were very complimentary of the quick decision. We did make mistakes, and I think that I wanted to openly apologize to families for some of them, and those are systems mistakes that I think we need to revise. The fact that we were not quick at responding to sharing the information with families of what was happening, that's something that we will have to adjust. It was as simple as having a system that basically give families an update. I got an email from a parent that it almost brought me to tears. You know, the parent said to me, you know, I heard from my daughter. She didn't know what was going on, and then she emailed me or texted me later, and I said, you know, I'm so glad you're alive. And that kind of reaction should, as a parent of a young kid, I think is not the kind of experience I want any of our families to be experiencing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, you know, when some of these things happen, and so kids are taking videos, or kids are kind of engrossed in the activity of being an audience for this kind of thing. I feel that there's something that we owe to the community. And that, to me, is a real commitment to making sure that we all are part of the solution. Because when students participate as just mere witnesses and passive members of something like this, it is very scary. And it's something that is a reminder that we have to make sure that we engage the entire community in this process. There are many things that we'll be trying. I don't know if or many interventions that we'll put in place. We are talking to both our partners, both our city police, as well as the folks that actually run the safety protocols, as well as collaborating with students and families in moving forward. So we will be responding to that, and I just wanted to share that with you, and that really we don't take this lightly. This was something that, again, we're trying to create learning conditions for kids to thrive, and I also wanted to just to let you know that 95% of our students are probably more than 95%, so are making great choices on a daily basis. And there are some unfortunate set of events that happened that day that really led to this kind of situation. And so that is also real. Is that right? We need to address that and then determine what are the areas of improvement that we have. But I also don't want to undermine the hard work and the good work that is happening at the high school. I'm going to pause right there. I just wanted to bring that up to your attention and to make an open commitment to the community to let them know that we are here to listen to the need, that we also are fully committed to making sure that our culture in our schools is one of support as well as learning, and that's something that we don't take lightly.
Mr. Green.
If you forgive me, I may approach this through a series of small questions, points of information. How long was the high school under secure and hold?
I'm going to bring Alicia to just share with you some specifics.
For 11, because all the activity in front of the school is 11 is when the bell rings for lunch, and so I had to close it down. That was what prompted the decision. And then I was actually just reviewing our camera footage. The kids were back in the hallways at 11:32, so it was just about 34 minutes.
Okay. So it took about 30 minutes to get things under control once. Mm-hmm. Okay. Were there any serious injuries?
No, I was thinking, deep analysis and reflection on everything that happened. Luckily, these sorts of things don't happen very often, and so when they do, they're great learning opportunities to make sure all your systems are in place. And the one thing we're most proud of is there were no significant injuries to staff or students.
And I think that, to me, is the tale, right? Like, you made a decision, 30 minutes later, things were under control, no one was hurt. There may have been a communications mistake, and we should have got that email out sooner. I definitely empathize with parents who had a moment of panic because that email didn't go out in time. But it sounds like you used a fairly effective intervention to de-escalate things and allow people to return to normal without injuries and return to education to normal in a fairly quick period of time. I commend you.
Ms. Dion?
So I know that there were multiple fights that day, right?
Correct.
I'm wondering, was there some sort of, catalyst for, were they related in some way, or was it just a coincidence that there were some unrelated fights?
I mean, not related friend groups, not related groups. In my mind, they're a little bit related in that the first one in the morning was and very public with a lot of people watching, and that just contributes to the energy in the building. But two separate friend groups. And I do say friend groups, the big issue is often that they were friends and they're not friends anymore, and it just is this kind of issues that students are dealing with.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Through the chair, can I point something out? I know that there has been statements around weapons, and I keep on insisting that there's no evidence of that. And what I hear, the next remark is, yes, what are you guys hiding? And so I just want to make sure that that is something we put a bookmark on, which is there were no weapons on the event that happened outside.
And or inside. And if I may add to that, there's many things that were interesting about what happened on Thursday, but every single piece of the event happened with adults present. Like there were adults present, I guess not at the beginning of the one that happened outside, but there were adults with these students pretty much the whole time, and we would have noticed if there were a weapon. There were no weapons, so I just want to put a point on that. I know there are a lot of rumors out there, but there were no weapons.
Mr. Green?
Yeah, I want to build on this because this happens whenever there's an incident at Somerville High. We start hearing the rumors of like weapons, what are you hiding? But it's always like, my kid hears from other kids that. And I just want to remind families that at any given moment, there are 1,000 recording devices throughout the building at Somerville High. Like most of our kids have cell phones. If there were in fact fights every day, if in fact there were the brandishment of weapons, as the rumors say, kids would be recording that because when these fights do happen, kids record them and we see the videos. This isn't a new thing. In fact, one of the problems is that kids record them, and as you said, it changes the energy. But I think it's important for us to take a breath and realize that these things are still the exception in our schools, not the norm.
Can you just walk us through the difference between a lockdown and a secure and hold?
Yes. Secure and hold just means that teachers continue teaching. There's no lights off. There's no hiding in the corner. They're just supposed to, any students they see in the hallway, pull them inside their classrooms, and then lock the door, and you don't give passes during that period, but teaching and learning goes on as normal in the classrooms. A lockdown, the shades are drawn, the lights are out, you're silent, you're in the no view zone. Lockdowns are very, just a much more intense, scary, even the drills I find very sort of unnerving, because it's this be silent, someone's in the building. A secure and hold's we're just being extra safe. Oh, and everyone has to come in from outside, extra safe.
Thank you.
And we will be doing ours on November 14th. We'll be walking through those, and I'll be working with the consultants that we work with on those to just perhaps add some more information and some more slides to the drill at the high school in light of what happened, just to provide some more explanation.
John?
Thank you, through you. I can't imagine how hard that day was for the educators. I can't imagine, and administrators, I can't imagine how the last few days have been, and I just want to acknowledge and thank that. I actually found the voicemail. I told the principal that the voicemail that was shared, maybe for some people not as timely as they wanted, was really thoughtful, was really informative, and it gave me as a parent a little bit of a call to action to bring my kid aside and say, hey, you know what, I don't really want you to be part of this. I don't want you to be videotaping. I don't want you to engage and escalate things. And I'm sure, I look forward to what you share in terms of the lessons learned, and can there be a robocall that goes out? There's a secure and hold. We want to make sure everybody in the community knows what secure and hold is. I knew what it was, so it didn't at all freak me out as much, but I know a little bit more than most parents. So these are the things that hopefully you guys can share in the future, but I'm just so thankful that, again, nobody got hurt, and the professionals were doing their work as opposed to worried about communications, because that's what has to happen in the moment.
And I think the students need to be more educated on what a secure and hold means too. It does not mean an intruder in the building. It does not mean an impending threat. It just means we need you to sit tight for a while. I also actually want to shout out the assistant principals, the deans, and our community engagement specialists were right in the thick of both of these, and it is very hard on them. Trying to de-escalate kids who are highly escalated is incredibly physically and emotionally demanding. We've had a few mental health days taken over the past few days, much deserved. It's been tough on them.
Mr. Mazza?
Through the chair, just a couple quick things. Normally, when you have a secure and hold, right, there's a situation outside the building, you have normal movement in the building. But this was a different case in terms of, if we have normal movement and that bell rings, kids are going outside. And that just amplifies what's happening outside. So I think, Principal Carson and the team made the perfect call, shut the bells off, keep everybody in classroom. So that, it was a little different than your typical secure and hold, but it also shows the importance of making sure that we practice these things, because we've been doing this for 9 years, and we still, find mistakes in what we're doing. Principal Kirsten just mentioned that some of the kids thought a secure and hold was a lockdown. That's something that we need to correct, because they're two distinctly different things, and they mean different things. But it really shows the importance of, we're not going to be perfect, but we need to have a system in place in case something happens like this.
Ms. Parrish.
I just want to say thank you to you and to the folks who supported you through your decisions and who will continue to support you as you work through, how to do things differently next time. I'm just so happy that you were making these decisions. So.
And I hope I don't have to make them anytime again in the near future.
Likewise.
All right. If there are no other questions for Ms. Kirsten, we will move on to our policy that also we might have questions for Ms. Kirsten. So, Ms. Parrish, do you want to give us the...
Sure. So, in your packets, there is file JHCA, which is redlined with that this decision has been tested. She works with our students to make sure that bases were covered and whatnot. If folks have specific questions about it, I can try to answer them. Ms. Kristen's here as well. And this is first reading, so
Dr. Ackman.
Thank you. I just want to share my full-throated, as I lose my voice, endorsement of this. I'm very excited by it, and excited to, show the high school students that we trust them, and to show the administration that we trust them to make these decisions. So I think it looks great. I thank you for your work. Because I believe in the process, I'm not going to move to waive first reading, or whatever we call it, but I'm really excited to vote in favor of this.
Mr. Green?
Through you to either Ms. Parrish or Ms. Kirsten, obviously Somerville High is not the first school to go to an open campus in any way, shape, or form. Is there anything about this policy that is particularly different from other high schools with open policies? Because if not, this feels pretty straightforward to me.
To my knowledge, no. And as you mentioned, Somerville would certainly not be the first. I believe that Dr. Ackman has attested to her experience in Cambridge. I can look into it further, but I'm pretty sure this is pretty standard.
And my first call in looking at this was to Cambridge, and I got their policy verbatim and talked to some of their leadership over there about the challenges or the pros and cons.
That's good enough for me.
Dr. Ackman? Dr. Phillips? All these doctors.
Somebody over here. I just wanted to put it out there that this is a policy that, technically we shouldn't really be voting on. We're voting on it because we voted on the last one, but in actuality, this is something that the high school could have decided for itself and written into its handbook. So I would like to suggest that we as a body get some guidance from our lawyers about when is it something that we as a school committee actually have power over, and when don't we? And I think just a presentation from Paige could be really helpful in the future.
Ms. Patel?
I'm just curious through you, we went through this whole rigmarole to create the original policy with the intention, I assumed that it was a legal thing that we had to do, partially because it was a big shift and a big change, so that I would think that I guess us as representatives of the community have voice, but I don't know why it was that. So that was the assumptive of why we had to edit the policy, but I don't know. I'm curious why it is not something that we would be responsible
Looks
for.
like
I don't
Mr.
know.
Green has parliamentary thoughts.
So we actually asked about this when it first came up with our lawyers, and it does fall into a gray zone. Some districts would do it at the district level, some districts do it at the school level. We still need to get better about the process of approving handbooks, which, if it was done that way, we still have the final word on it by approving the handbook. But since we haven't done that, and it falls in the gray zone, the superintendent made the executive decision that was probably worth bringing to the school committee in the absence of those systems.
Dr. Carmona?
Just to piggyback on the question of having someone to support our policies and processes, Mr. Kusher from MSSA, I believe, MASC, is going to be joining us. We need to set up a time and a date in which he comes in. So we will, through the chair, we'll figure that out. But that's in the works.
Are there any other questions on the policy? Seeing none, we will have a second reading at our next meeting and vote on it then.
If I can go out of order for 1 minute, I just want to say that auto is open and you can take your cars in anytime.
Oh, good. I didn't know that.
Next Wave Full Circle entrance was fixed and has been open since the beginning of the school year. And to get through tough times, the Unified Basketball had a home game today, and it was like you can't not watch that and feel just total joy. Like you have to feel total joy while you're there. And I know that's out of order, but I just had to add that.
That is fabulous, and thank you for that, Mr. Green.
Before you go, if we're going to take things out of order, is there anything we can do to see the return of the Highlander Cafe? Because it was the best restaurant in Somerville, and it pains me if we put the building in such a way to make that impossible.
We are working on it.
I did.
Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to field trips. I will entertain a motion. Dr. Ackman.
I move to approve a November 19th to November 20th field trip. 8 students from the high school will attend an overnight field trip to the Fall Leadership Conference at the Best Western Marlboro. Attendees will travel by van. I can do them as a group, right?
Yeah.
Okay. January 18th, 10 students and 2 staff members from Next Wave Full Circle will visit Pat's Peak in Henniker, New Hampshire. Attendees will travel by school van. The cost per student is $25. February 15th, 7 to 8, 10 students and 2 staff members from Next Wave Full Circle will travel to Pat's Peak in Henniker, New Hampshire, and attendees will travel by school van. The cost per student is $25.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Dion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the approval of the side letter. There should be a motion in your packet that we had reviewed during executive session.
I move to allow the superintendent to negotiate with and enter into a side letter with the SEU relative to individual flexible schedules for Unit A members pursuant to Article 5, Section B, subsection 5, which states, upon agreement by the school committee and the union, a principal may schedule a bargaining unit member, other than a classroom teacher, to begin their workday either earlier or later than the workday described above, provided that there will be no increase in the length of the workday.
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Barish, seconded by Dr. Ackman. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to the ratification of the MOU with the AFSCME Clerical Union.
I move to authorize the chair to sign the ratified clerical union, AFSCME Clerical Union contract.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Dion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to acceptance of grant funds.
I move to accept all federal entitlement and continuation grants and all state continuation grants awarded to the Somerville Public Schools listed below. Northeast Food for Schools in $50,000, gives intent to increase the capacity for food authorities to produce local unprocessed or minimally processed food for service in the National School Lunch Program. Love it. $35,000 to the Somerville Education Foundation from Biogen to support the STAR Data Specialist position for the 23-24 academic year. Loving this. From the state, CS Engaged to support the expansion of digital literacy and computer science curriculum in grades 6 through 8 for the amount of $14,421 from the federal government. Growing literacy equity across Massachusetts, GLEAM, an early education grant for $62,500. And a Perkins grant for strengthening CTE for $82,989.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman, seconded by Ms. Dion. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. That brings us to school committee office hours. So we usually do joint fall office hours. We've done them in the past kind of around this week in November, and I will admit that I dropped the ball and forgot about it. So I'm bringing it up now. Dr. Phillips and I discussed it. We were thinking perhaps the first week in December to get us past the Thanksgiving holiday and then give us time to actually advertise those times. So just let Dr. Phillips know when you would like to do some, and she will get them to the district, put them on the website, and put them together in a list. So that's that. Which brings us to, oh, yes, thank you. That brings us to reports of subcommittees. We have an Ed Program Subcommittee and a Rules Subcommittee.
Move to accept the report of the Ed Program Subcommittee and the Rules Subcommittee.
Second.
I have a motion by Dr. Ackman and seconded by Ms. Barish. Is there any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Which brings us to items from committee members. Looks like nobody has any items this evening. All right, that brings us to condolences. Dr. Phillips?
We have one with my battery dash.
I think I have it.
Oh, great.
Because I believe that Erica sent it to me as well, so I can read them. Sure. Okay. The committee would like to extend our condolences to the family of David John Byrne, father of Taylor Byrne, art teacher at Somerville High School. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.